Yeah. So next we're going to talk about the first mode of transmission, which is sexual transmission of HIV. Sexual transmission of HIV is the most common way that HIV is passed from one person to another. So it's extremely important to know how to prevent sexual transmission of HIV, because that is the way that it is most commonly passed. So when we talk about sexual transmission and sexual prevention of HIV, what are some of the fluids that you think could come in contact with a door during sex?
Semen.
Semen. What are some of the fluids?
Pre-ejaculation.
Pre-ejaculate.
Vaginal fluid.
There's vaginal fluid.
Anus.
That's a door that could be involved in sexual transmission.
Sweat.
Sweat? Yeah, well, like we said earlier, sweat actually won't transmit HIV. So what was another fluid?
Blood.
Blood.
Blood. So blood could be included in sexual transmission of HIV. Okay, and so what are some of the doors? I heard anus, vagina, penis,
Open wound.
and open wounds. All the doors can be included in sexual transmission of HIV. And so we are going to give you the tools to know how to prevent sexual transmission of HIV, and we call these the ABCs. So A stands for abstinence, and abstinence means no sex. So this is an option that someone can take to prevent sexual transmission of HIV. Someone can choose to be abstinent by not having sex. So what does abstinence mean?
No sex.
I'm sorry, what?
No sex.
No sex, right. The B stands for being faithful. So being faithful means having an open communication with someone's partner or partners and getting tested and knowing each other's HIV status. So being faithful is another option that someone can take to prevent sexual transmission of HIV. If someone knows their partner or partner's HIV status, then they can take the appropriate measures to prevent HIV transmission. And the C stands for condoms. Now condoms are a barrier that could be worn on the male's penis or on the female's vagina to also prevent HIV transmission, as well as other STIs, or sexually transmitted infections. And when we talk about condoms, I want you to remember the 3 C's. The 3 C's of condom use, which is correctly, consistently, and continuously. A condom should be worn correctly, because if a condom is not worn correctly, then it won't be effective, or it might not be effective. A condom should be worn consistently, so every time that person has sex, a condom should be worn if they're choosing to use condoms to prevent HIV. And then it should be used continuously. That means throughout the whole entire sexual act. So what are the 3 C's? Correctly, consistently, and continuously. Right. Okay, so what does the A stand for?
Abstinence.
Right, and what does it mean?
No sex.
What does the B stand for?
Be faithful.
And who can tell me what being faithful means? Yeah?
Getting tested so you know your HIV status and communicating that.
And the communicating that, right. So having that open communication. And what does the C stand for? Condoms. And how should they be worn? Right. So someone could choose to use any number of these at a time. And just because someone is choosing to be abstinent doesn't mean that they can't later choose to be faithful or use condoms. Or someone can choose to use condoms to prevent HIV transmission, and then they could later choose to be abstinent or to be faithful. So there is no particular order which someone has to use these sexual prevention methods. Someone can use any of them at any time. So that is the way that you can prevent sexual, or anybody can prevent sexual transmission of HIV. All right, so we'll pause there again. Important key points.
The ABCs.
The ABCs, so that is what we're teaching here, is the ABCs.
It's good to have them repeat the fluids and the modes
Yeah.
that are associated with sex.
Yeah, and so that's a huge part of teaching in general. You know, you don't want to just be lecturing to people, because that is a way to put people to sleep. You want to be engaging, you want people to be saying things back, and that's a good way to know that people are listening. So if they're not saying it back, then you ask them louder and even more forceful, and then they'll know to listen. Yeah.
Prevention.
Yeah, so yeah, we're talking about prevention. So that it's important to talk about the ABCs and how each of these can be used to prevent sexual transmission.
Have most of them at least heard of condoms before, or no?
Actually, like a lot of students have not learned about condoms, or like many students do not know about condoms. I taught in a college classroom where after we were done teaching, we oftentimes walk around when we can and talk to the students so they can ask us questions in private if they want to. And a lot of times the guys would come up to me and they'd ask me about condoms, like what it was, or how it's used. And so it's important to define what a condom is. It's a barrier that prevents the sexual fluids from coming into contact with any of the doors. And it can be worn by either a male or a female.
Are they as accessible there as they are here?
Yeah.
Male condoms are as accessible there as they are here,
Mm-hmm.
especially now. But they're just highly stigmatized if people
Yeah.
don't get them for those reasons. But you can get them for free a lot of places.
And then I noticed in the curriculum that you don't do a demonstration necessarily in the class, but maybe
Oh, for the
that's
condoms?
like an after class thing that you can, because I mean, if they don't know what a condom is, then they don't know how to put it on, and, you know,
Right.
Right.
that stuff. So
So it's been suggested in the past that you could bring a condom, not necessarily show it in front of the class, right?
Yeah, so well, the one thing I was going to say, which kind of goes to your question, and we'll get to yours, sorry, is that sexual transmission is really hard to talk about, and sexual prevention is really hard to talk about in Indian schools because of the taboo nature of the subject. Sometimes we walk into schools and headmasters or headmistresses will say, you can't talk about sex, you can't talk about condoms, you can't say the word condom, you can't say the word sex to my children. And then you're like, okay, how are we going to do this? Like, so yes, like saying things about what a condom is and explaining those things are all great, but sometimes it can't happen when you're formally teaching, right? So then maybe, like Hunter said, kids would ask him after class, you know, what a condom is or what it does. We might be able to, in some cases, depending on the school, bring a condom. You would never be able to demonstrate how it goes on something. But like we've tried to work on other ideas, and like IAPA is really interested in kind of that field and how we can teach people how to correctly use a condom. They can always like learn from us or, you know, resources that we have. So if they're looking for that, like suggest that they talk to us afterwards or whatever.
So if you have someone like a headmistress or whatever kind of watching you and you're explaining sexual transmission and they are totally against you saying sex or whatever, how do you tailor that to get the point across?
Yeah, sure. This is something that hopefully you guys will practice because it will happen to you and you'll be like, I have no idea what to say in this situation. And so when we talk, in those cases, like we just tread as lightly as possible. Like there's no way for us to talk about sexual prevention of HIV without at least kind of describing how it happens, right?
Yeah.
So we just tend to focus on the fluids and doors and just like these are the fluids and these are the doors, and if they come into contact, in whatever way they come into contact, then these are the ways that it can be prevented. And so you can kind of get around saying, you know, the word sex or talking about condoms. You can almost always at least mention it, like if you know, she's like, or he is like, don't talk about condoms, you could say, the C stands for condoms. If you have any questions about that, come talk to us after class. And then like, then your job as a teacher and as an educator and as a facilitator is to then at the end of class go around and specifically ask students like, hey, do you know what a condom is? Or like, hey, do you know what like semen is? Or something like that if you're not allowed to talk about it.